This is a course in the mosses of the Boreal forest, which is a really nice place to start because there are not too many. A quick estimate, you know, a fast walk found 40 mosses within a 15-minute walk of where we're standing here, many of them big and conspicuous. No one's going to learn 40 mosses in a weekend. So the first thing to say right up front is to learn even one species, that shad, which really is not a species, but which is an aggregate, a composite of pieces of many other species. And that moss, which is very definitely a clear, distinct type with a charm and identity of its own. To learn even one species is years of, it does different things in different places, in different seasons. It behaves, it has a role, it cooperates with other things, it appears in certain places. That's a lifetime project. So our real focus is not you knowing X number of species for the first 2 hours after you walk out of class, but is to lay down a process that has worked. The classes that I do now and that we do together and have the same format. We start with being able to talk about stuff. We have to have a language because everything else follows then from the mutual interplay between the things we see and the words we have. So in order to get you talking moss, give you about 10 minutes to, mosses on the table are the ones we're going to look for in the field this morning. They are the biggest and most conspicuous ones of the Boreal forest floor. Pick just one of them, please, and with your hand lens and your eyes, and if you don't have a lens or if you want to try a different lens, there are a variety of sizes. They're all tangled together, of course, but those are all good lenses and they're just different. Look at the lens, look at the moss, make some sort of a sketch of it, and then write down or label your sketch with words that describe it. They may be formal moss words or informal moss words. You know, our process is very much a process of looking at things, looking at situation, and then guessing what we think something is. If guessing is not a scientific word to you, it is a provisional conjecture based on the Bayesian priors, but it's still a guess. And the guess is absolutely essential. Very few books talk about the necessity of guessing, but it gives you a place to start from. Illuminated lenses are great, but you do have to change the batteries once in a while and so on. I almost always, except on bright days like today, have a headlamp on when I am working, and I can use that with or without the lens, and I use it just all the time in dark corners of the woods. I can also hold my lens up like this and shine and have the light actually pass through the lens and focus on the thing. So the right sorts of headlamps work very well for me too, and they're much cheaper than good illuminated lenses, but a good illuminated lens is a wonderful, wonderful thing. So I recommend them both. Once in a while we'll do a common name, but the common names are not in common use. And the names that one commonly hears when people are, in the moss bars on their fourth round arguing moss at night are all Latin, or in the back behind the moss bar with, fists and leather, duking it out to settle the thorny nomenclatural issues. Those are the Latin names. So the Latin names are much more common than the English names for mosses. So this is Pleuroseum schreiberi, or just Pleuroseum because we have only one. So, hold it up like that and then point at the units. So you probably have about 3 years of growth there and one or two new stems that had come off the side. This is a common pleurocarp architecture. Hylocomium does it very well, and I call it arch and repeat. So go up straight, arch and spread out, and repeat. So from the back of instead of continuing to go from the tip, a new frond from behind, arch and repeat, arch and repeat. Species, especially in old-fashioned plants like mosses, are extraordinarily wide-ranging. I have mosses in my yard that are on 3, 4, or more continents. Ecology is much more local than species. Picking up a really important detail, her 2 hands are doing what when she looks at the hand lens?
One's bracing on the other.
One's bracing on the other, and the hand lens needs to get close to your eyes, so often one hand braces on your nose too. And at that point you have a microscope and you can adjust those very carefully. To visualize the smallest details, and this is not the best situation, you need to hold the moss up in light, so it is backlit by skylight or something, but against a dark background. So the moss is lit from behind, but the background you're watching it on is a tree trunk or something. So you stand in the sun with the moss up, and that backlighting against a dark background yields the sharpest detail that you can see with any given power. So those 2 tricks, hands together, careful adjustment, and backlight and find a dark background, are what you go for when and again, this is non-ideal situation for it, but it's amazing what you can squeeze out of a hand lens. Here we go. We're going to walk for 5 or 7 minutes. We're going to pass some beautiful mossing. Eyes straight ahead, not right or left. We'll be there later this afternoon, and then we're going to a fork in the Boreal Life Trail. We're going to take the right fork. We'll all be together. One gets to know these textures and things. So I see already half a dozen or more of the mosses we had on the table, including you had a little tetraphis in Leucobrium. There are ancient ruined monumental stumps all covered with tetraphis over there, like some Mayan ruin in the jungle. Let's divide into a couple of groups, and this is not a moss race. We're not trying to do 10 species in the next hour. If you do 1, 2, 3, 5, whatever your pace is, the better you get to know them. Lots meaning half a dozen decrinums out here. They're fairly specific to habitat. This was growing on decayed soil and is medium-sized. And, I can eliminate some as small or that only grow on tree barks. The second thing is that these leaves are really curly when they're dry. And the third thing is the stem is really invested with this fuzz, the rhizoids and stuff. And the common Decrinum scoparium just does not fit. It doesn't curl its leaves. The common Polysedum wouldn't dream of not having medium straight leaves that were ripply. So they're out. And the next northern one that I think of is Onteriense, a good name for a boreal forest moss. We almost never see this. We see it every day in Maine and so on, and every day in the Northwoods here, but we, down in the oak maple zone where I am in South Vermont, I never see this. So I'm just below its range.
Good thing, we hardly moved.
How did it go? We hardly moved. That's my ideal day.
Yeah, I should have brought my chair.
Yeah, really.
When you look at mossy logs and tree bases, the 2 things to take care about are that you have big and small mosses, and that they are often mixed together. And looking at the small stuff and trying to identify single plants of small stuff is all possible. If, you know, if an angel comes to you and says your eternal happiness depends on you doing that. But if you want to be happy in the here and now forming concepts of mosses, you want to restrict yourself to the biggest things and the things that cover large areas, and ignore the smaller ones until you're ready, and ignore the stuff that's mixed in with it. So start with the things that resemble things on the table, and start with the stuff that covers big, large amounts. There are plenty of liverworts. They're small. There's no stopping them, but they still qualify for a look, even, and we had some of them in the classroom anyway, because they cover very large areas in the initial stages of decay. So the bark comes off the bark is still on a log. A lot of the species that were on the tree simply come down with it. They live for a while. Eulota does not persist. Platygerium does persist. Pileasium may persist. If it was low on the tree, Hypnum pellescens says, I do logs fine, and I also do rocks, and I'll go anywhere. So some of them persist. No. The bark comes off, and there's the bare wood, and it can be very dry, but if the woods is humid enough, down a slope a little bit or so on, the liverworts cover it very, very quickly. Noelia, Ptillidium, Lophicolia, Jamesoniella, and you'll see those. And then the log gets to the point where you can start to dent it with your finger, and then later on where you can push your pencil way into it. And at that point, the log is a real nutrient source and a real water storage. So when it's wet out, the mosses are looking up and they're getting all the through-fall from the canopy, and that's very nice. But when it's dry, they're basically an absorptive cover over a source of water vapor that is evaporating. And as it evaporates, transpires through their leaves, the water vapor deficit pulls more water out of the log. So a wet log is an enormous source of water vapor for them, and they're very happy there. If the log is a little bit wetter, the next height of mosses come in, and then we're into the acrocarps, and in particular it's Dicranum country. Dicranum flagellare, Dicranum montanum, the curly one, Dicranum scoparium, the bigger one with capsules that curve over. On the tree bases, but also sometimes on the logs, Dicranum viride, the Dicranum with broken off tips. It's a perfectly distinct character. You may have to look closely to see that the tips are broken, but if you see a Dicranum that looks like someone's been doing with the barber shears, you've got it, and it's common out here. But then, if it's moist enough, shall we say the more selfish mosses that want it all for themselves, the creeping pluricarps, informally in the Boreal woods we call them either the overalls or the coveralls. Those words are kind of interchangeable. So all of a sudden, Hypnum especially arrives, and Pleurozium, Hylocomium will be on the logs. In warmer, more deciduous woods, Antedon gets in there. And there's one that's kind of looks like anything it wants to on any given day, and it'll fool you, it fools us, Calicladium, but it will be very common on the tree bases and the logs. What does the Prince of Denmark say? Into it like French falconeers and fly at everything you see. Dew forms on the points of things first. There's a story behind that, but it's not important. So it'll form first on the tip of the grass, and so on. Mosses have these teeth, and they have sharp points on the leaves, and they're very good at being places where vapor condenses. Let's let habitat tell us one thing, and let's let biology tell us a part of that. Plagionium ellipticum, ciliary, and cuspidatum are all common species. And cuspidatum and ciliary are in just every kind of woods, two of the commonest mosses that we have. Ellipticum ecologically is more of a swamp species, and taxonomically it is either a hybrid or originated from a hybrid between likely ciliary and something else. Ciliary is the most striking of the species in that the teeth are very long and they run all the way to the base. Ellipticum kind of looks like that, but the teeth are often much smaller. Cuspidatum has nice teeth, not as long as ciliary, but they stop halfway down the leaf. Long, just grab that. And the leaves were sort of flattened along it, very ferny like fronds, and those will come out after the fruiting is done this year, and they'll come out in abundance. And those arching flattened stems are very much, they're the plagio, they're the flat part of Flatynium, Plagionium. Much field work of all kinds is done with incomplete information. And it's the nature of field work, and that means that we're less certain than we might be. Often we're certain enough, and that's fine. And certain enough might either be that we know for certain this is this blackberry, or that if it isn't, it's something very close and nobody cares. You know, so that, you know, that we're pretty close to the target, which is fine. You know, and that seems to me very reasonable. At some point, our information is just not enough, and prudence requires, you know, so, you know, can one tell all the woodland grasses apart by their leaves? With pretty good certainty, if one is in the woods and sees them in the habitat and how they're growing and who they're with, placed in a jar on the table, it's just gotten much harder. Pressed and on a herbarium specimen, probably impossible without the growth style. There are just not enough characters. In a blurry photograph on a popular website, no chance in the world. So the happy message is try hard, because you can do a great deal. You know, we all who do survey work with sterile material all the time and stuff like that. We do not collect the roots of every tree we identify. We don't even collect the leaves. We just walk along and say, the yellow birch, thank you. But there's no need to try too hard when the information doesn't support it. Really there isn't. Let us walk back. You've done very well. Mossing is hard any day, but the first day is often by far the hardest. We sort of model the thinking about these things, and then making them your own is a slow but endlessly pleasant, fascinating process. It can be naming. It can be as simple as looking at the ones on a tree you like every couple of weeks and just seeing what they've done since you last looked at them.